happy birthday to President Uhuru Kenyatta. This is the day that he was born. On a day like this, many years ago. On a day like this, 3 years ago, the president was up there going to vote for the second time for Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. We can only believe that that's what they did. Voted for Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto ticket in the repeat presidential election. Today, at Bomas of Kenya, the president, among other leaders, including opposition leader Raila Odinga, will be launching the BBI report. And this is the report of the steering committee on the implementation of the Building Bridges to a United Kenya Task Force report. So it'll be launched this morning at the Bomas of Kenya. And then after that, we hope that finally people will be able to read this particular report. They'll be able to interrogate what has been contained, some of the proposals that are contained here. It's very important that we mention from the very beginning, some of them are just policy proposals. Some of them can just be implemented immediately. They don't require any kind of action. They just require the government to do so, the government to go to parliament if they require some legislative amendments to be made or some laws to be enacted. That is what would happen. And in some of them, they're proposing some constitutional amendments. And some of these constitutional amendments would require people going to a referendum. The talk has been all on the reggae has come back and we're going to a referendum. But let's look at some of the areas that then would necessitate this referendum, and focusing today on this Chapter 9 of the Constitution, where they are proposing to expand the executive by expanding the national executive to promote greater inclusivity and mitigate the drawbacks of the winner-take-all electoral formula. This recommendation proposes the introduction of the office of Prime Minister and 2 deputy Prime Ministers. It also provides that cabinet ministers may be appointed from among members of the National Assembly. The committee makes this recommendation cognizant of current provisions of the Constitution, which bar state officers from receiving emoluments for more than one role. So basically, let's just look at that. It is proposing that we're going to have a president, a deputy president. We're going to have a prime minister and 2 deputy prime ministers. Prime minister and the 2 deputies come from parliament, and also other members of the cabinet may come from parliament. This is said is so that it mitigates the drawbacks of the winner-take-all electoral formula. What has been happening in the country, according to the report of the BBI and according even to the agenda of the BBI in the first place, is why is it that every time we're going into an election, we finish an election and there is much contention thereafter? Because that's what they say, the loser feels like they're left out. The loser feels that, I campaigned, I went around the country, I campaigned for votes, I got X number of votes, whatever, 100,000s or millions of votes that I got, and then I'm just left out. And then the person who wins takes everything. Winner take all, loser loses and is expected to go home. This is what actually is contained in the current constitution. Remember, even before, presidential campaigners were also, for you to be president, you had to be an MP. And if you then are elected as an MP and you don't get the seat of president, you are okay because you'll end up in the National Assembly, you'll participate in the national discourse. And we saw this happening all the time. Leader of official opposition, the person who garnered the second highest votes in a presidential election becomes the leader of official opposition, assuming that their party also gets the second highest number of seats in the House. It's also being proposed here that we reintroduce the leader of official opposition. Those that are against this are saying that by expanding the executive, what you're doing is you are, first of all, just taking care of a cabal of personalities. Secondly, you're just allowing the president then to have powers to play here and there with who becomes prime minister, who becomes deputy prime minister. And therefore, the president now starts playing games in the National Assembly, in parliament. And that is not good for democracy because it then promotes the idea of an imperial president. What do you think?
I think what it does is that it makes it extremely top-heavy when you're looking at positions. Because if what we are saying is that you're going to then increase the number of positions, what you've done is that you then increase the number of positions to essentially appease people. what you've done is that you've made it extremely top heavy at that point. And if we've looked at one of the really big issues being that not being able to even afford the positions in government, and we're talking about affordability now in terms of being able to pay or being able to compensate them, it has already been a problem. I see what you've done with this is sacrificed one thing for another. To say that you now put so many positions in place for the purpose of appeasing and making everybody happy, and then really looking at and not really looking at what it entails then for governance, to me then becomes an issue. And I don't think that would have been the only way to be able to solve some of these things. And then going along this whole thing of the loser must then be appeased. It should not be that a winner takes all. It's a race. At the end of the day, it's a race. Things like election malpractice and all of those things aside, it's a race. And I think we have to get to the point whereby if you're running a race and then deal with the systems that make sure that you have electoral misconduct dealt with and things like that. But then also be accepting of the fact that you will have a winner, you will have a loser. But this thing of appeasing people and then making it extremely top heavy is also an issue. It's a problem that you deal with there.
This race, though, is a political race. And with politics, perception is very important. And what I think this top-heavy structure that you refer to deals with the aspect of perception. Now, as to whether it'll work or not, well, that brings us to the question of, okay, so the alternative of providing a solution to what clearly is a problem with our political system, where it has been for the longest time, because of our constitution, that the winner actually takes all, literally.
What is the problem?
That the winner actually takes all? That's actually the problem. That the
Yes.
winner takes all.
And
Yes.
what is the problem with that?
That's why I don't see a problem with that.
The problem
it should be
with
that you
that-
understand that one person's got to lead the nation. One person's got to take the responsibility for putting things up in order in terms of nation ruling. It's got to be that way.
The reason why you have different political systems, in my opinion, is it's a factor of what people prefer, what their choice of how they would like to be governed is all about. Now, with our system, it was brought into being because it was felt what we previously had probably didn't meet the master. Now, it appears that there are those who think that this system that we have doesn't quite do what it was intended to do or what they thought it would do, or it has created problems that had not been anticipated. Now, what then is the alternative? If this one doesn't do, it isn't the panacea. If it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, what is the alternative? What we currently have?
Yes. I think our problem is the lack of good manners, the lack of proper manners by our political leaders. You lose an election and you feel that you're entitled to something. And you come up with this argument, oh, you see, I control 15% of the population. Oh, you see, I got 1 million votes. So what? The game is that you, the person who has the most, gets to be the president. You do not control that vast majority.
It's like saying that
Is that it?
we're going to have a race, right? And so instead of saying we're going to declare a winner for the race, we're going to say, it's okay, we're going to have this race. It's a competition. We're going to have this race and let's have 3 winners so that everybody can be happy and we're not going to have problems from the crowd.
we're going to have a
saying that
podium
the person
finish.
who ran the fastest will have a podium finish
Gold
and we'll have
medal,
one
silver.
level. No, we'll have one level.
But that's
Everybody will have gold.
I mean,
and there's so many people who ran in the race.
It's true that competition is competition, but surely there is a fundamental difference between, for instance, running a marathon and having a political competition. There's a vast difference. Because you're talking about many people actually participating in the process of getting these leaders to where they are, as opposed to running where my participation is actually watching. Now, I don't invest the amount of emotion and energy that I invest in a political process as I would a race, because I know it takes place and that's the end of it. It doesn't really affect my life thereafter. But a political competition, unfortunately, does. And if you look at the problems that arise from, say, the system that we have, it's that it's not even just so much winning, and it's not even the winner takes all. The winner takes all and its manifestation leads to the idea that only few people, as our system is presented, few people benefit from the system. And not few in just 2. The president, no. But it's like 2 communities benefit disproportionate to other communities. That is the perception. Remember, I'm talking about politics and perception. That is the perception.
And that perception is spearheaded and being manipulated on the people by some people. a cabal of people who
Are you
bad
saying-
manners
are
at the
you
top
saying
level,
that there's
who
no
want to come and
evidence?
say, just because I am not in the leadership position, then my community is not in the leadership position?
Are you saying that there is no possible evidence to lend itself to this perspective that people have?
There is evidence provided by politicians.
No.
On
what
the
they
ground,
point to,
there
does
is
it exist
absolutely
or
no
doesn't
evidence.
it
It
exist?
does not exist, in my opinion.
Yes.
This is not a problem that gets us to a point where we should be having this conversation and saying that this is our problem. It is not. When you have people who then get to the position of where they get to, so we have a president who's a Kikuyu, a deputy president who's a Kalenjin. Do you have a speaker of the National Assembly who's not a Kikuyu or a Kalenjin? Yes. Do you have a speaker of the Senate who's not a Kikuyu or a Kalenjin? Yes. Do you have a leader of a minority in the Senate who's not a Kalenjin or Kikuyu? Yes, you do. Do you have other people who are in senior positions of leadership who don't come from these two communities? Yes. Does this then change, this proposal of having the 5 people, does it bring anything different? Absolutely not. It's going to be the same.
I introduced a word, disproportionate. And remember, my underlying argument is that it is a question of perception. Because the real argument and the differences that arise are from just that thing, perception. And these are political perceptions. Now, unfortunately, with politics, those perceptions represent reality for most people. And that, in my opinion, is what this particular top-heavy, configuration is proposing to address. Whether it'll work, I would argue, I don't know. But what then is the alternative? And you're saying the current one, and I'm saying the current one is what is in dispute.
I'm thinking
in
that
dispute because
it is
the
the systems
few
that need to be
individuals-
worked on to be sorted. Because if you can bring in as many people as you want, if you want to bring in 100 people, bring them. But if your system has inherent issues that are not being solved, that are not being worked on, when you talk about electoral procedure, when you talk about things like corruption and impunity, if you don't deal with those things that are systemic, if you want to bring 100 people and put them in governance, go ahead and do that. But you're still going to have a problem. Somebody will still have a problem tomorrow about election results. Somebody will have an issue tomorrow about how my person is not being represented, how my person didn't get this particular appointment in government. It will still continue to be an issue if those systemic issues are not dealt with.
Let's bring in our guest now in the show. And our guest this morning is Narc-Kenya party leader Martha Karua. Martha Karua has vied for president, not won, not been included in any expanded executive, stayed out for 4 years. Martha Karua has vied for governor, not won, contesting that even at the International Court of Justice. But she is not governor. She is not in the executive of the Kirinyaga government. All right. But Martha Karua has participated in writing the 2010 constitution and also in the push for a clamor for a new constitutional dispensation for the country. Good morning, Mheshimiwa.
Morning. And I'd like to amend that I vied for governor and won. It was stolen from me.
All right. Martha Karua vied for
Yes,
governor.
I did not
She was
mobilize
not declared
Kirinyaga
winner.
people to cause mayhem.
Martha, you've read the BBI report, I'm sure, because you've
Yes,
seen
I
your
have.
social media comments on this. And now today we're focusing on this proposal for an expanded executive. You've heard our intro, various opinions and positions on this particular one. What is your position on the expanded executive as proposed in the BBI?
I would like to say that the BBI steering committee and the proponents are burying their heads in the sand. The problem is not about positions. The problem is electoral justice. People feeling like I do that the elections were not free and fair. People feeling that their victory is stolen. Therefore, the issue to address is electoral justice. And our 2010 Constitution already addresses that in Article 86, where it is provided that the elections must be free and fair, must be transparent, must be accountable, must be verifiable, and the records must be accurately kept. If we properly implement Article 86 and other provisions of the Constitution, Article 10, on public participation in some of the decision making, we will be fixing the electoral process issues. And that's what we need to do, not create positions. If it were true that we needed to give runner-up a consolation prize. That should apply to all the posts. We should have a runner-up governor getting something. We should have a runner-up MP getting something. This argument is built up to satisfy whatever hidden plans the two BBI principles have. It is not an honest opinion. It is not an honest move to create extra positions. And those positions are actually heralding the return of the imperial presidency, where the president, without any approval of parliament, appoints cabinet ministers, both from parliament and from outside. That means even if his appointees are unsuitable, we've got to live with it because we are not allowed to examine, we are not allowed to vet through our elected representatives. Only the Prime Minister gets vetted, and even then, he is appointed and fired at will by the President. You wonder, if Parliament has to validate his appointment, why don't you get Parliament also to validate the sacking, if indeed this is an important position? And I would like to say without any fear of contradiction that the role CS Matiang'i is playing of coordinating the functions of government, there's already a de facto Prime Minister. Why do we need to bring in extra expense of extra positions when they are already able to do what they are proposing to do? Then comes an untruth, a falsehood, that it's not going to cost taxpayers because these will be parliamentarians and they will not be paid extra salaries. In Kenya, we know as a fact that sometimes allowances, especially of parliamentarians, outstrip the salary. So it is not true to say nothing extra will be paid.
Yeah.
The responsibility allowance, there will be other hidden allowances bigger than what would have been the salary.
But Martha,
So this is, I agree, it's a top-heavy executive, which is meaningless to the people of Kenya. Then comes something funny. You change the name of the leader of majority to leader of government business. You change the name of leader of minority to leader of opposition. How does a change of name improve efficiency or help the situation of not feeling left out? People are being taken, we are being taken for fools
you
by
talked
the
about
proponents of BBI.
you talked about, and let's actually get back to that point. At what point was this talk necessitated? This talk was necessary because of a handshake, and the handshake was necessary because of the political tension right after the last general election. And this has happened before this particular election, and it is likely to happen in the future again. So you mentioned it, and you brought down the problem, according to you, is political, it's electoral injustice or lack of electoral justice.
Yeah.
Is this the one that causes people then to have this sort of acrimony after an election and then start campaigning immediately after an election, a winner has been declared, and go on for an entire 5 year of an electoral cycle?
Let's not mix the issue of campaign and the issue of electoral injustice or justice. The phenomena we are having started actually in the post-election violence of 2007, where when ODM felt aggrieved, instead of going to court, they decided to mobilize people for, in quotes, mass action. The mass action was looting, mayhem, and displacement of people. Then elements within PNU also prepared retaliatory actions which were completely outside of the law. So the phenomena of taking the law, people taking the law into their hands, is what is being addressed. Yet, if the elections were free and fair and perceived to be free and fair, people would live with the outcome. And I do remember also that during Moi era, there was rigging. But Kibaki and Matiba, who were victims of that rigging, did not mobilize people to get out to the streets. There was action in Parliament. There was a bit of tension, but we lived with it. So it's choices people make. And I've said at the start of this, I am still aggrieved by the way the Kirinyaga gubernatorial election was handled. I could have mobilized. After all, according to them, I had 44%. I could have mobilized my supporters to cause mayhem within the county. I did not find that necessary. I went to court. I'm not happy with the court result. And that's why I'm in the East African Court of Justice, whose judgment is coming on the 30th of the next month, November.
So, Martha,
so it's
choices
choices people make.
With what I mean, even just using what you've said as an example, because I am of the opinion that if a top-heavy executive then is going to be able to solve some of these grievances, which you said you've also been through, would you then, in a situation like this, anybody, having gone through an election and you feel as though, or you feel aggrieved because the results were not according to what you've seen them to be, would a solution then be inviting you to be part of an executive then that dealt with an issue and then those grievances would have been dealt with? Because that's what we're seeing in the BBI today. That's what we're seeing today.
Personally, I would not accept. And that is why the president invited me to his cabinet and I said, no, that's not the way to do it. You know, I think that we need to address the issue of electoral justice, and that is by implementing our 2010 Constitution. It's not by creating expanded positions. And look at what comes with it. Why are we calling it the return of the imperial presidency? Look at what they are doing to the police force. The National Police Commission, which is already in the Constitution, is chaired by a civilian. The police are being removed from the control of politicians. But BBI is returning the police to the control of politicians. And I bet police officers may not even be happy with that. Because once you return them to the control of politicians, then they are given orders that actually are contrary to the law and to the Constitution. And you've seen examples that since the advent of the BBI, double standards are applied in policing, where those who are pro-BBI are allowed to go on with their political gatherings, while those perceived to oppose BBI are not. We don't need a politicized police. Asking a cabinet minister to chair the police council is giving the president a hand in the running of the police, in the hiring and firing. And this will cower the police in the performance of their duties. Look also at the judiciary. Introducing an ombudsman. By the way, the judiciary already have their own ombudsman. It can be improved. But you cannot have an ombudsman appointed by the president. There is no provision that this appointment will come from the judiciary. It's not a ceremonial appointment. It's the president introducing his representative in the judiciary to police the judges, to investigate, listen to complaints, to decide which judge continues working and which judge gets fired. That will cover the judiciary. It's an assault on their independence. It's also an assault on the Judicial Service Commission, which is supposed to be independent, with the ombudsman sitting there. And the Judicial Service Commission is composed partly or largely of judicial officers, judges and magistrates. They'll be cowed by this government inspector, because I would call him a government inspector, not an ombudsman, sitting among them. Look at us returning to the dark days under the guise of improving control of the judiciary, control of parliament, by introducing cabinet ministers or secretaries who are from the executive. All these are not good things. And that's why I'm talking about the imperial presidency.
When we had our problems in the year 2007, 2008, we ended up with a coalition government. Did that particular government resolve our electoral injustices?
It did not, because all that happened is the only thing the coalition government resolved was bringing the two sides together and having the muscle in Parliament to pass the reform agenda. And we ended up with the 2010 Constitution. But electoral malpractices were not resolved. Look again at what happened. We have an electoral commission known as the Independent Electoral Commission. The appointment process is partly political because it goes through vetting in Parliament. It's said it's competitive, but at the end of the day, the commissioners, though their name is independent, have not proved that independence. The elections are still not free and fair, and the the constitutional requirements of a free and fair election have not been fully implemented. So for me, we should focus not on who sits in anniversary towers, but on how to ensure that the process is free and fair. In other words, how do we fully implement the constitutional provisions? And this is by some administrative things and by rules, not by amendment of the Constitution. We've changed the Electoral Commission composition 3 times, almost 4 times, during IPPG with this current Constitution. And before the passing of the current Constitution, we sacked all the commissioners as part of the agreed agenda in the National Accord. We then recruited a temporary commission. Then after the coming of this Constitution, 2010 Constitution, we recruited a new commission. So an average of 3 times of changes. Look at where we are. Electoral justice is not solved. The lesson for me, focus on the process, not on who sits in anniversary towers.
This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. We're looking at the BBI proposals. The BBI report is being launched this morning at the Bomas of Kenya. The BBI proposals on the expanded executive, and also what Martha Karua is calling the return of the imperial presidency. What is it that you think the expanded executive is going to do? Is it addressing the problems that we've had as a country? In the room this and every morning is Eric Latif, Nduoko, and C.T. Muga. And we're joined on the line for this hour by Martha Karua, the Narc-Kenya party leader. Talking about the BBI, the report is going to be launched this morning at the Bomas of Kenya. And we are looking at one of the provisions, and this is the expanded executive. And it's said that it's going to address what we've been having in the problem. And it says, by expanding the national executive to promote greater inclusivity and mitigate the drawbacks of the winner-take-all electoral formula. And that's why it's proposing to have these positions of Prime Minister, 2 deputies, and also provides the cabinet ministers may be appointed from among members of the National Assembly. CT, when you're stating your position on this, you said, look, we've had a problem in this country, and the problem is people feeling not included, and this is what the inclusivity is being addressed here.
The example that I think is actually being followed by the BBI was set in 2007-2008 with the coalition government. And if you look at the issues that arose thereafter and how we've conducted our business, almost every government that has actually been formed in this country has been a coalition, in the sense that parties have come together to form that. And those who've been in the opposition have been similarly a coalition, whether it is CORD, whether it is NAC, whatever you want to call it, but that's what they were. Now, this, I think, was from that very understanding that people needed to put their minds together so that the representation issue is actually catered for. Mm-hmm. And that's what coalitions do. Mm-hmm. However, the practice is where now the problem comes in. Because, and then the issue of perception that I mentioned also is brought to the fore. Now, many political problems, in my mind, can only be solved by a political solution. Now, the details that Mheshimiwa is speaking of, I am actually in complete agreement with her. But you see, how do you get to a point when you can actually implement these things to the satisfaction of what was deemed correct within the Constitution? In my mind, you bring in a political playing field that can enable this to happen. Now, I'm referring only to the position at the top. The other details that have been mentioned, I'm also in agreement with her, because some of those things represent a clawback. It's like we've moved forward, and some of these proposals seem to be taking us back to where we'd moved from. If you look at many countries that have in their parliament the opposition, The understanding is that a time may come when those in parliament or those in power may not be able to hold their position. And the opposition is actually like an entire government in waiting. That's what they are. But in the absence of something of that sort that is within the constitution, then what you have, yes, the individuals who may be in the opposition, but the structure that could actually isn't there. So we have what you call a party leader. But a party leader is just a civilian. But when you have a leader of the opposition, that person actually has, in my mind, a position from which they can actually launch these same processes that we're talking about.
Even now, we have a minority in the House.
Yes, but that is not what you call a minority leader.
It's not an opposition.
No, it's not leader of the opposition.
What is the leader of the minority? Mheshimiwa, maybe you can help us to understand this. In the current constitution,
Leader of opposition, leader of minority, these are semantics. It's just a change of name. And a change of name will not bring efficiency. It's just like substituting cabinet secretary for cabinet minister, as if change of name would bring in the efficiency. Today, the ODM is occupying the leader of minority position in the National Assembly and even in the Senate. Why have they not utilized it to provide oversight to the government? And the the answer is simple. They have been co-opted in government. We are having an unofficial coalition, which is unconstitutional because the Constitution clearly says Kenya will be a multi-party democracy. There will be defined roles for the minority and for the leader, for those in government. Those roles now have been merged. There is no oversight in parliament. They continue to occupy those positions, but they act more government than those in government.
But Mheshimiwa, even prior to the handshake, Mheshimiwa, even prior to the handshake, in all honesty, if you have a leader of the opposition and yet you have somebody referred to as a party leader whom they are, in essence and in reality, answerable to, what powers do they really have? When you have a leader of the opposition within those bodies of parliament, then this is somebody who can be addressed directly because they are the ones who actually lead that particular party. Here it's like you have a two-tier system. You have a leader of the party, not in parliament, not in the government, and then you have leader of the opposition. How does that work?
That is what we chose in the 2010 constitution. And there's nothing that stops those given the position of leadership in parliament carrying out their duties. It's just a different system of government. And if leading the party needs the person who is the party leader to be in parliament, then the amendment would be restricted to having that leader in parliament, not to creating new positions. And to also kind of hoodwink the people that there is no opposition leader. Minority leader is the actual opposition leader in a presidential system. Majority leader is the leader of government business. So here we are just playing with names.
Actually, I don't seem to share with you that perspective because so long as if you say, for instance, leader of government business is the leader, and yet you have the president who is the party leader, and then you have somebody who's leader, minority leader, and then you have party leader. Surely the real semantics exists, yes, but now the con in the statement is this, that those people who are in parliament are actually leaders. They are not the leaders. The leaders are actually
the higher-ups.
Yes, the leaders are actually the party leaders.
In a parliamentary system like in Britain, the prime minister is actually present in parliament to lead his party. The opposition leader is in parliament to lead his party. More or less what we had during the Kanu era before the 2010 constitution. We had the leadership in parliament, but not the president. The president used to appoint a person within the party, mainly the vice president, to be the leader of government business.
Yes.
But in a presidential system, the party leaders are not necessarily in parliament.
All
You
right.
appoint the
Okay.
minority leader and you appoint the
The minority leader.
majority
But
leader.
what
So we are
prevents us
considering
from
the two
actually
systems.
coming up with a hybrid that suits us, that doesn't fall into the traditional parliamentary, presidential, whatever systems we have?
By suiting us, what is the problem? I mean, what's wrong with what we have?
What I'm saying is,
We adopted a presidential system, which we have not fully
Implemented.
Which we
Understood.
were not ready to live by. Basically, it's because
No.
we-
You
we-
can't tell me that. A majority of Kenyans
we pick
are
s-
ready to live by. If you listen to the vibe on the ground, very few people have warmed up to this BBI. And you must look at this way. A government that has consistently, for the last 8 years, failed to properly implement the Constitution, disobeyed court orders, is now the one telling us, let's amend the Constitution. If you cannot obey the present Constitution, of what use will it be to make amendments, which you may
that is-
never very well obey?
no, you've
This
asked
government-
you've asked a truly good question, but I want to take you back when you say the vibes on the ground. You know, the thing about the political landscape in this country, it cannot be said universally that the vibes in one part of the country ordinarily and necessarily would be the vibes in another part of the country.
I'm talking of polls repeatedly done by pollsters, not my own view. BBI
Yes.
has no support.
Now, if you
Let them
mention
do
polls,
another-
then I would have to say, I would have to question how accurate are polls in A, depicting what is on the ground, or even in predicting the outcomes. How often do polls get it absolutely wrong?
The polls can be manipulated, yes, but repeated polls by people who are not interested, and when the politicians are not. Remember that the politicians who are in a position are the proponents of BBI, and the polling has been showing BBI has no support. My experience in mixing with people in various parts of the country is that BBI has no support. And in a free and fair elections, it will fall on its face. But even before we go there, can an illegitimate parliament legislate? Can an illegitimate parliament pass constitutional amendments? Because whatever method we choose, parliament has to participate. These are the questions. Let the current parliament go home, as advised by the Chief Justice. Let us go to election. Let us rein in on impunity. We might very well be able now to properly implement the Constitution.
The question then comes in quite often that how then do we make sure how then do you make sure that the problems, which in my opinion have been systemic over time, when you saw problems in 2007, when you saw problems in 2013, when you saw problems in 2017, it was not necessarily because there was a certain group of people that were not appeased. It was because there's a systemic issue, and when you have problems with the electoral procedure and the process, you will always get people then who will not be satisfied. So for me, expanding the executive doesn't deal with the problem. It puts a band-aid on kind of like putting a band-aid on a heart attack. It doesn't deal with the problem. So whomever you want to put there at that position, chances are that same problem will rear its ugly head for appeasement and not for anything else. For appeasement of people at a certain point to say, okay, well, I can still make the decisions, but since you are here, it would be seen to be that we are all making the decisions together. And to me, that's totally not what is going to be the case. It's totally different from what would be the problem. Sort out the systemic issues. Sort out those issues that lead to the divisive politics that we see. People don't have a problem that is a particular tribe that is at the seat of the presidency. People have a problem with the process that took that person there. Was it flawed or not? How are we going to be able to deal with the flaws that we see in the system? And I think if you went to the nitty-gritty, you would see that is what people actually have an issue with. And I think that is what needs to be dealt with.
The people problem is a personality problem. I keep saying this. In my belief, we have a cabal of politicians at the top right now in our national politics who are the ones who are manipulating our thoughts and minds. We have absolutely zero problem with going to elect people to positions of authority. Look at Martha Karua and the kind of votes that she got in 2013. Did you get votes only from Kirinyaga County? Of course not. She got votes from across the country. Not only were those voters Kikuyus or people from her backyard. No. People vote for leaders because they see this as a leader. We have been made to put to a point where we start believing that Uhuru Kenyatta is the kingpin of Central Kenya and therefore the leader of the Gikuyu. William Ruto is a kingpin of the Rift Valley and leader of the Kalenjin. Raila Odinga, the Luo, and such and such. So that's why now we start talking about people feeling left out, is because Raila is left out, and therefore because Raila is out, the Luo are out. And that's not the case. That is not always the case. That's not the actual reality on the ground. This is the perception that has been created by this, what I'm calling the cabal of political leaders. When you talk about now creating these 5 electoral positions or 5 top positions in the expanded executive, it's only going to create opportunities for these individuals. And those individuals then would start talking about representing regions and tribes. Do five tribes or 5 tribal blocks represent 44 tribes of this country? They don't solve the problem.
Political arithmetic doesn't quite work like that. Because if you're talking about perception, and this is what I've been saying, my underlying discussion has to do with perception. Political perception sometimes, and not even sometimes, oftentimes represent the reality for most people. They perceive it and they think and believe that is the truth. Now, what you speak of when you say what we need to uproot and what we need to resolve, yes, indeed. But which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you have an atmosphere within which what you're saying can be done? Or do we try to get this thing done so that we can achieve the parity you speak of? I am saying that in politics, if you ignore that perception, then whatever it is that you're trying to prove or trying to solve will not really get very far.
The people who are being appeased are being appeased. The people are not being appeased to then go forth and make change in the system.
They are not being appeased.
No.
The people who are then being included at this point, they're being included and they're very happy to eat part of this executive cake. They're then not interested in working on systemic issues that bring about these divisive politics that we're talking about. By the time you put people and include them in this expanded executive that you're talking about, the last bit of their business is actually deal with the problem because they're satisfied.
Some of these problems that we speak of could have been resolved by Parliament. Not so?
Yes.
Could have been.
Yes, could have been resolved by Parliament. But if you talk about
Right now.
yes,
exactly.
now. But if you talk about systemic issues, again, ask yourself the question, why have they not been resolved?
Because
Exactly.
the
And then
people
what
are
is
not
going to
interested.
guarantee that they will be
Political
resolved
will.
with an expanded executive?
There you go.
There's no guarantee.
Mweshime wants to say
Martha
something.
is saying no political will.
I'm actually saying they have not been resolved because there's no political will.
Exactly.
The narrative
And why is there no
driven.
political will?
The narrative right now being driven by the president and his BBI brother, the former prime minister, is that only those who get to the table or the people who get to the table, then their backyards will be looked after. Look at the projects that the president has, together with Right Honorable Raila, introduced in Nyanza. Look at the projects in the president's backyard. The rest of the country is now feeling excluded. Look at what BBI has done. Brought intolerance, where meetings of those not in favor of BBI are broken up. Look at what is happening around the country. A newfound friendship between two people, and in quotes, their communities, because it may not necessarily be true, and then some others now developing grievances that they are excluded, because it's clearly showing exclusion, especially of the deputy president and of anybody else who voices opposition to BBI.
But Mweshime, did
Then
BBI
if
really
they are
bring
not-
about, as you call it, did they bring about intolerance? Surely our political system has had intolerance from time immemorial, surely.
But that political intolerance of refusing to listen to the alternative view had almost faded. If you remember even the no campaigns of 2005 referendum, Kibaki's administration did not break up any no rally. Even in 2010, when we fought for this constitution, the no rallies were as prominent as the yes rallies. Come BBI, you cannot have a divergent view. If they're in Bukungu, you cannot be in Mumias. Members of parliament cannot meet the people to us in their constituencies. Even very recently, we had the Malara Mudavadi meeting broken up. We have COVID rules applying to those the administration wants them to apply to. And we have cabinet secretaries, including the cabinet secretary for health, flouting the COVID rules, including the president. And that is okay. So the intolerance is back, reloaded, ever since BBI. If that is what BBI proposals are going to do to this country, then we really must reject BBI. And if those in power want people to forget about ethnicity, treat all areas of the country equally, let development and services be given to everybody, irrespective of who they support. This is one way we will make Kenyans forget tribe when we are electing. But we are now reinforcing the issue of tribe by the way we are behaving. So to the president and to the former prime minister, if you cannot put Kenyans together and promote free exchange of ideas, then BBI is the wrong thing for this country. It better be withdrawn. It's not only unconstitutional in that it excludes, in that it discourages public participation, it's also not good for this country and must be rejected.
Martha, we thank you very much for joining us again this morning. Martha Karua is the party leader of Narc-Kenya and expressing your views on the BBI report. Just before you go, Martha, do you want to throw the baby with the bathwater, or are there some parts of this BBI report that you think could address some of our issues?
There are administrative things that can be implemented without constitutional review, like paying contractors within a given period. These are administrative issues. This is what is anticipated by the Constitution. Go ahead and implement that. If it is giving the counties 35%, I remember the president in answering the Raila-led Okoa Kenya constitutional amendment push, of which I was a big supporter. He said that already his government was giving the counties 35, I think they said 34%. If that was true, why do we need to legislate? Secondly, the Constitution sets the lower limit as 15%. It does not stop the government from giving the counties even 50%, leave alone 35%. These are proposals that can be implemented today, not tomorrow, and without waiting for constitutional review. If it is the plight of the medical workers, having a commission to manage them, this can be implemented without constitutional change. We need to see the government absolving the health workers who have been unfairly sacked in my county and in elsewhere, especially now that the government says they are looking for health workers to boost the health system because of COVID. These are things they can do right now. If you're not doing it now, if you're not respecting the 2/3 gender rule, you're hoodwinking women that BBI is the answer. What stops you from now, immediately now, from implementing the 2/3 gender rule in cabinet in all the parastatals?
Long talks there.
Don't hoodwink Kenyans.
Thank you very much.
Everything that appears positive can actually be done right now without any constitutional amendment.
Asante sana, Martha Karua, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.